Do you plan to send more weapons to Ukraine? I'm disappointed that Putin hasn't stopped it yet. Everything that is happening between Russia and Ukraine right now is terrible, and I am absolutely displeased with President Putin. If I can stop the war, because I have the ability to do so, I should do it. We're going to send more weapons. They need to be able to defend themselves. They're being hit very hard right now. We're going to have to send more weapons, mostly defensive weapons. We have with us Yuri Rashkin, a public political figure from the United States of America, a member of the Rock County Assembly, Wisconsin. Yuri, good to see you. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Irina, glad to see you. Trump is already adequately answering questions about the Patriots. Even we saw it. And Zelensky says, yes, the issue of the Patriots came up, and Trump didn't say no. It's an interesting point because Trump says everything to everybody, and he then says something again. Or he is reminded that he said something and he ignores it. But as far as I'm concerned, the situation with the Patriots is pretty straightforward and unpleasant, because it's very telling. And what we're seeing with the Patriots is that the United States has told Ukraine to fall in line. We're selling, of course. We're glad you've realized that there's nothing for free. And you're willing to pay for it. You're moving in the right direction. The only problem is that you continue to annoy Vladimir Putin. Please get in line behind Israel, perhaps behind Taiwan. Israel doesn't seem to use Patriot missiles. They have newer technology, but you stand, and when Israel says they are satisfied, then we will sell you something. It's bullying, and it's the modern politics of Trumpism. Because it's like, we're not saying no to you, but you're not likely to actually get anything. If you had a good relationship with Vladimir Putin, or if you destroyed Vladimir Putin, then you could and should be negotiated with. Until then, until you can destroy Putin and have been able to befriend him, get in line for the Patriots, whatever. I think the only upside here, and I'm stating fairly obvious things, and that it's also obvious to the Europeans. There was a very interesting article in Foreign Affairs this week about how Ukraine is like the Wild West of military production now, because now all the manufacturers in Europe, if not the world, are eager to work with Ukraine, because in Ukraine you can test new weapons right on the battlefield in real time, no waiting weeks, months for a test in the lab, and so on and so forth. Here were combat conditions, and that's necessary and important, and that's the front line of Russia's confrontation. For this year, 2.5 million drones should be released in Ukraine. This is a very serious confrontation, and I realize that we need patriots, and we need weapons that will stop ballistic missile attacks against homes, because we realize that Putin is a spewer. And that Putin will suck people's blood for as long as they give him. And that his appetite will not change. And in that sense, his disciples see this and behave in a similar way because they think he is doing well. So if you prove that he fails because people like that end up like Gaddafi, then maybe it will be an important lesson and conclusion for others, and maybe they will be scared. But when a dictator gets scared, unpredictable things can happen. So we find ourselves in a spiral. It is very important that it goes for us. And in the situation in which Ukraine is now working diplomatically with the United States, it's very difficult to discern if this is in any sense a plus, in any sense a neutral speed, or in any sense perhaps even harmful. Because you could say that maintaining important good relations with the United States is an incredibly important partner. They make the patriots. Who else? We have to work with them. On the other hand, we realize sort of what I've already said. Okay, so then maybe it's neutral sort of need to maintain relations with the United States so that they just don't abandon Ukraine completely and diplomatically and so on. And there is an approach that this is simply harmful to Ukraine. Because if people think that the United States will decide everything, and until the United States comes, nothing can be done, and it is impossible to resist without the United States, then this is a harmful approach to diplomacy, because you have to understand the goals of this approach. And it will never be possible to achieve permanent stable access to weapons, arms supplies from the United States under this administration. And as proof, I'll just say that for now, that we're still waiting for the first aid package from President Trump. But you can always buy from them and not have your hands tied. It would seem because money rules the world and he loves money, but he doesn't want a bad relationship with Putin. He doesn't want to lose Putin. Trump, the American president, cares so much about that. Yuri. Trump gives him an ultimatum. He says, "Come to Turkey. I'm sick of all this. You, me, Zelensky, and no. We're back in the Graham Blumenthal game again. Increase sanctions. Give Ukraine. Sell in any format weapons. And that's it." What does Putin do? Will he disagree and show weakness to the world and lose Trump forever? I think he can really get under his skin anyway. Possible. I'm looking at the fact that Putin will not want to see footage of the celebration in Kiev as a celebration in Tehran. And in the sense that if there is a ceasefire, it is a giant victory and a credit to Ukraine, which thus validates the failure of Putin, who thought he could take Ukraine in 3 days. As a result, Putin had to stop. This is a holiday that was being brought as close as possible. So, I don't think it's going to help here. It's not going to make Putin calm down in any way. And on the other hand, what I'm seeing in the United States is the tightening of the oxygen that's happening here domestically means that President Trump, Donald Red Sunshine, the greatest of all presidents and of all time, that's sarcasm, is going to be asked fewer and fewer uncomfortable questions. And this is probably the main topic of our discussion today, that Trump will be asked fewer and fewer questions. And most importantly, the uncomfortable questions will now be asked by Ukrainian journalists from BBC. They will not be asked by American journalists from CNN and MSNBC, who are no longer allowed in the room. On an international platform, Trump hasn't seen CNN much, though she's on the plane with him, Caitlin Collins. But he doesn't get uncomfortable questions. He's now sort of living more and more in this space where he does what he wants and let the consequences punish him, not the journalists who ask questions, not the courts, which are now apparently starting to fail in stopping more and more. And certainly not American politicians who need an election to prove themselves. Otherwise, it's unclear what stage they should be on in podcasts. And by the way, the man who may now be the next mayor of New York City has built an incredible social media following. He had a 1% popularity rate in February, and he's such a TikTok star that he went viral through his company. That's the way to do it too, and such variations of politicians will come in, and they will be able to answer what the old politicians are not able to answer. We will see this process, and Trump is certainly happy with this person. Why? Because whoever will probably be the next mayor of New York City has a Muslim last name, Mamdani. And he's a Muslim, that's it. You don't even have to sort it out. And on the other hand, he self-described himself as a socialist Democrat. The question is over. This is the new face of the Democratic Party. Trump will now be telling everyone about it on every corner, that they are Muslims, Arabs, anti-Semites, etc. And this is part of the confrontation that we're seeing with the radicalization of the country. The pendulum has swung so far to the right that the Democrats or the left has swung to the left. And where would that lead? Support for Ukraine? I have my doubts. To the fact that America will endure. I think America will endure because we can't even imagine that it could somehow split. In a way, we have no experience of an authoritarian state. We can't imagine it, just as we can't imagine a completely divided country, because even through the Civil War we survived. We'll see what happens here, but things are heating up, and while things are heating up here, pressure on Putin from Trump is not expected. He has one constant star. If Trump had a chance to see Putin in Istanbul, he would go. Putin said he wouldn't go, and then Trump said that if he wouldn't go, then why should I go? Until we meet, nothing happens. Devalued the whole negotiation. Russia should be nervous about the negotiations. What happened on the eve of the last talks? A spider web. So from which suitcase will the next drone fly out? The Russia is nervous about possible negotiations and probably wants to schedule them urgently, in half an hour, before Ukraine has time to do anything. For now, what can we expect from this negotiation? Trump wants to be a peacemaker, but what kind of peacemaker is he? He can yell, but he can't yell at Putin. Accordingly, his peacekeeping activities end there. His secret weapon doesn't work. A screaming president who you can point at Israel or Iran, and he'll yell at them, and they'll be like, let's wait. And he can yell at Ukraine, at Zelensky, but he can't yell at Putin. Our weapons don't work that way, our most powerful weapons. So I just see things from that perspective. Thank you so much for today's talk. Thank you. See you next week. Take care. Yuri Rashkin, public politician of the United States of America, deputy of the Rock County Assembly, Wisconsin. I am Irina Uzlova. Friends, subscribe to Yuri's YouTube. Active link in the description below this video. And on YouTube, 24th also don't forget. Donald Trump, it's ours, yours, or just his own? Let's talk about with Igor Eidman, sociologist, political scientist from Germany. Igor, sincerely glad to see you. Trump is not happy, says, zero progress, accomplished nothing, disappointed with Putin. And apparently, he does not understand what decisions he is making. We've never heard before. Good talk, good guy. Something else was heard here. President Donald Trump also in a phone conversation already with Zelensky, which he himself announced. After a frustrating conversation he had with the Russian dictator said, at least Axios writes about it, that the U.S. wants to help Ukraine with air defense because of increased Russian air attacks. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that Trump was informed about the situation on the battlefield, the intensification of Russian terror, joint defense cooperation, and the protection of Ukrainian skies. The conversation is productive. Is Donald Trump changing anything in his behavior, or what do you attribute this frustration with Putin to? Yes, he's been disappointed, charmed a few times already. He's got this kind of pendulum swing, always in the mood. He generally behaves towards Putin like a girl behaves towards her lover. And such a girl exalted to her beloved guy. Such a courtesan and an officer. Such a story from the 19th century by Alexander Kuprin. Yes, it's really quite real. Such a reality show, the whole world is watching the vicissitudes of the relationship between these two people, between the cadet girl and the officer. So, the last story was so not a laughing matter at all. As we know, quite unexpectedly, the American press wrote, and American official bodies confirmed that they took the most important weapons. The most important weapons, including, by the way, anti-aircraft, anti-missile weapons, took and froze the deliveries. Under the obviously completely far-fetched excuse that they need to inspect their own stockpiles. that now Ukraine will pull all their weapons from them, and poor America, which Trump has already made great, will be left unarmed simply, defenseless against the entire world. Of course, complete nonsense. This was clearly Trump's fulfillment of Putin's demands. Apparently, Putin made this demand in order to continue negotiations, in order for there to be some possibility of realizing these plans of Trump about friendship with Russia. All these golden mountains that have been mapped out by Kirill Dmitriev in his time to Witkoff, they should finally move across the Atlantic toward the White House, or toward Trump's personal vault. But actually, this all took Europeans aback. It's just that no one expected it at all. Because it was completely, so to speak, without a declaration of war, such a trap. And next, clearly after this decision, Putin deigned to talk to Trump through this phone call. Trump proudly announced, just a day after partially freezing aid to Ukraine for very important types of weapons. So Trump announced that Putin would talk to him. Putin patted Trump and said he'd get some candy. Trump was very pleased, and I think Trump was waiting, as promised, for Putin to finally give him a date. After all, this date is a key element of Trump's entire strategy. He is just terribly eager for this pathos, beautiful, grand rendezvous of two emperors, as Napoleon and Alexander I were. A meeting of two emperors, two great men, two captains of the world, two commanders leading their countries to greatness. And it is terribly important for him. He loves such theatrical performances. He loves such pathos stories. But judging by his reaction to his phone call with Putin, Putin ignored him again, ditched him again, didn't give him a date. I mean, he promised and he dumped. That's 100%. The cadet girl was highly just resentful of the officer. He really just ignored him. Trump was talking about, let's get together and start kind of finally organizing our great world. And Putin started telling him again about Polovtsians and Pechenegs. Trump was extremely offended. You can just see without words. You can see that the man was offended. They didn't give him candy, this meeting, this long-awaited date. But that's a good thing. Now I think Trump is going to move in the other direction, and you can already see from today's conversation with Zelensky that he's really, apparently made some positive moves in the other direction, which is Ukraine. I hope, at least, that this insane decision to freeze key parts of the nomenclature of weapons that the Americans were supplying to Ukraine, that this freeze will be lifted in the near future, because Trump has no motivation to continue this now, since he was dumped anyway and was not allowed into Putin's body. Even if it was the reason that he was offended and did not get candy, and candy bouquet period will not grow into anything more. Any love lost? No dating. You're right. Thank God they won't meet. Let him imagine what during a face-to-face meeting could have been discussed there, and how Putin could have used his various skills and fallen at his feet, actually complimenting Trump just to get his way. But Putin didn't, yes. Or maybe he didn't, because he is offended that Trump screwed him with Iran. Did he not involve his friend and his love in the solution of such an important geopolitical issue? No, I don't think that's it, because he didn't throw him all the way. What did Putin want? Putin doesn't really need Iranian nuclear weapons. He doesn't need competitors in the nuclear blackmail market. He has to stand alone. So I don't think that's the point. I think it's more about Putin blowing up. Here's the real thing. Putin has lost any grasp of reality at all. I've said the same thing repeatedly. It's long been favorable for him to make concessions to Trump, to accept Trump's offer, and on the frozen war and stuff. That would obviously be to his advantage. But he's getting cocky. He's demanding more and more. He took as a weakness Trump's apparent, his sort of emotional dependence on his sparring partner in these bizarre phone calls. He took it as a sign of weakness, that he should be pushed through and on. First, as I said, he blew up and apparently decided that he had grabbed God by the beard Putin, since even the American election gave him such a gift. And if he's got a fortune, he needs to use it 100%. That is to push Trump lower and lower, lower and lower, so that he would just finally fall at Putin's feet, agree to all his conditions, stop helping Ukraine, fully recognize Crimea and other occupied regions as part of Russia, and so on. And he's trying to squeeze him. I feel like he's squeezing, really squeezing, and it could backfire. He will not be able to push Trump to the end, because Trump is not alone. He is not a dictator unlike Putin. He cannot make such jumps around his own axis, 180-degree change his positions as Putin can, because there is Congress, there is public opinion, there is the Republican Party, and there are many people who are categorically against Trump's alliance with Putin between Russia and the United States, and many people are categorically in favor of supporting Ukraine. We're already seeing, even now after this aid freeze, some U.S. senators have come down very hard on this. And that's why Trump is between two fires. He wants to favor Putin, but he does not want to turn the Republican establishment and public opinion against him. So, if Putin continues to throw him around as hard and publicly put him down, as he is doing, then clearly he can be completely overpowered, and Trump at least will certainly not do anything good for Putin in this situation. I'm afraid he won't do anything particularly good for Ukraine either, but at least Biden's help will come again, and that's a lot. NBC News writes that Pete Hegseth, aka the U.S. Secretary of Defense, his behavior sometimes really doesn't leave us any other chance to see him as a wit. He decided to stop the transfer of military aid to Ukraine, despite the fact that there is no threat to U.S. stockpiles. No U.S. ammunition stocks are running low. And the U.S. Department of Defense decided so, according to 3 congressional aides and a former U.S. official. The decision to suspend military aid shipments was a unilateral move by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, which even just among congressmen and everyone has caused dissatisfaction. The interlocutors of the TV channel added that it was Edward Colby, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who supported the move. But how could these two, Colby and Hegseth, act without Trump? Yeah, I absolutely don't believe it either. Pete Hegseth, he's absolutely such a Trump favorite. He put him in the arena, he's frolicking. He's a zero without Trump. And by the way, his confirmation was the toughest of all. The Senate approved him with even more opposition votes than the crazy anti-vaxxer Kennedy. This is the second time he has allegedly stopped shipments on his own initiative. When he became Secretary of Defense, he stopped shipments in the first few days. Trump decided it wasn't time. Now again, Trump hinted to him that it was time, and he stopped it again. I hope, at least. And now he's probably going to be held responsible again for the fact that supplies have been stopped, and supplies will be resumed, because Trump has no motivation now, since Putin is screwing him anyway. Even with that, he didn't get Putin's love, and Trump is frustrated and disappointed, and he may increase sanctions and lift this pause. And we won't feel bad. We didn't count on anything more. But at this stage in this situation, there is more plus for us than, of course, for Russia. Yes, of course, absolutely. Especially now the congressmen are getting active again in July. Because they kind of said at the time that the situation in the Middle East is tense now. We will come back to this later. It's time to return to the new sanctions package, as the situation in the Middle East has more or less stabilized. I think they are going to start pushing again now, But as I've said many times, I don't have much faith in these sanctions either. But it's clear that there will be no real sanctions against those countries that trade with Russia and buy oil from it. And it's secondary, so-called sanctions, which is, again, draconian customs tariffs, Trump's favorite subject, as we've said. It won't be against China or India, because they're not interested in a new phase of tariff war right now, much less on such an occasion. The other issue is that there's all sorts of interesting stuff in there. By the way, the American press has also noted that Biden's sanctions are a little outdated, because new suppliers and intermediaries have entered the market. Chinese, Indian, and Turkish companies that are engaged in helping Russia circumvent sanctions. But since there are no new U.S. sanctions, these companies don't get in there, and they are free to do it. That is, of course, there should now be such an update of sanctions to introduce the necessary, if not secondary sanctions against countries, but at least against companies and banks that are involved in these schemes. That would absolutely be realistic if, again, I had a shred of confidence in Trump and his administration. I'm even afraid that right now this administration is not even tracking what new companies, new banks coming up in these schemes. The Europeans are tracking, but the Americans not. So here, too, I don't have complete confidence that these sanctions will work. There you can bypass them, of course. And now, everything is developing at such a lightning speed that it was relevant not just yesterday, it will come now. It may not only in the information space, and in such a space to be already obsolete. Igor, thank you so much for this conversation, your thoughts and stance, of course. See you again. Take care. Thank you, Irina. Good to see you. Have a good day. See you again. Goodbye. Like our viewers always watch us. Thank you. Igor Eidman, sociologist and political scientist from Germany. Irina Uzlova is my name. Subscribe to Igor's Telegram channel. Direct active link below this video. And on YouTube on the 24th too. All of this helps our conversations move up on YouTube.